It's no secret COVID has changed the way many Canadians work. For some of us, working from home meant striking the right work-life balance. Now, Ontario passed a bill Tuesday aiming to make that balance the law. It's a part of the Working for Workers Act. Monte McNaughton is the province's Minister of Labour, and he's in Toronto. Minister, appreciate you being back on the program with us. Want to talk about the blurring of lines. Certainly even before the pandemic, there was a blurring of lines that affected work-life balance. And then along came the pandemic and we're working from home, many of us, and you never really quite knew when the end of the day came. How will this act address that?
Well, I'm proud to say that all parties at Queen's Park supported our legislation, the Working for Workers Act. The part in the bill that you're referencing is our right to disconnect policy. Ontario is the first province in the country to bring forward a legislation that really is about bringing transparency and giving workers really the right to disconnect. So we know during the pandemic that the lines between work and home time and personal time has been blurred. So we're requiring employers with 25 or more employees to have a right to disconnect policy.
Okay, so the employers have to have a policy, but I'm just trying to, a lot of legislation really comes down to regulation and the way in which these kinds of things are enforced. So if you work for an employer and someone else in the company is willing to respond to emails at any time, doesn't that put them in a better position than somebody who chooses not to? Like, how does this protect all those employees?
Yeah, our legislation actually it ensures that there's a right to disconnect policy in the Employment Standards Act. So every company with 25 or more employees has to have a right to disconnect policy to really tell the workers when they're supposed to be on the clock and off the clock. The other benefit of having this and really rebalancing those scales to put workers in the driver's seat is when a worker goes for a job interview, they can ask the employer, what is your right to disconnect policy? So it really shifts the power to the worker, and that's the objective of this.
Let me just play it from the other side, though, for a moment. If I'm an employer and I want an employee who will respond to emails at all hours, and someone asks me that during an interview, I might pass on that interview candidate. How is it that I understand the intent of the legislation, but there's a gap between intent and the way that this would be exercised in practice. How does it protect the employee just to have a policy? Like, what is the enforcement on it?
Well, this will be in the Employment Standards Act. The Ministry of Labour inspectors will ensure that there is a policy posted. The policies will be tailored to the specific workplace. So again, this is about bringing transparency for the worker so they know when they can expect to be working and not working and at home spending time with their family. Again, more than 90% of people in Ontario know that the workplace has changed forever, and we need to ensure that governments are keeping up with the changing workplaces. We brought forward a number of changes to labor laws in Ontario, the right to disconnect being one of them. We're banning non-compete clauses. We're giving truck drivers access to washroom facilities in commercial buildings. So all of these changes are because of the pandemic. And I've said clearly, we're not going back to where we were before. We have to build back a better province, and these changes will go a long way.
So just to go back to the right to disconnect legislation for a moment, employers with more than 25 employees are going to have a policy. What happens if they breach that policy? What does an employee do?
Well, again, this is in the Employment Standards Act. The Ministry of Labour inspectors will ensure that it's posted. I've doubled the phone line capacity at the Health and Safety Action Centre. If workers are concerned, they can certainly call the ministry. But I also see it from another angle. If businesses want to attract and retain workers, they need to do this. The most successful companies in Ontario are actually doing this today. So, we're in the middle of a generational challenge. 315,000 jobs are going unfilled today in our province. The best companies out there are going to ensure that there's work-life balance for their workers.
Shifting to another part of the legislation around temporary workers. Lots of temp agencies and lots of sectors that have relied very heavily on temp agencies. In fact, some employers rely entirely on temp agencies to the extent that you don't know really who you're working for. And at places like food services areas in the Greater Toronto area, there have been reports of people not being paid because it's unclear who they're working for, that there's no workers' compensation protection for people because they don't actually work in the place that they work. How does this legislation around temporary workers further protect the many thousands of people working in Ontario as temporary workers?
Well, you're right. 130,000 people in Ontario are employed through temporary help agencies. I think it's been an injustice to these workers that no government has really taken action to crack down on those rule breakers in the temp help agency world. We're first off dedicating resources to hire investigators and inspectors to go out immediately and crack down on those temp help agencies that are breaking the rules. But we're also setting up a licensing system. It'll be the most comprehensive in the country. And these temp help agencies and recruiters, before they do a job and hire people, they have to be approved by the ministry. They will face the highest fines in the country, possible jail time if they break the rules. But you're also right. I mean, we've seen temp help agencies take passports from people, have them sleeping on straw bales, paying below minimum wage. We're not going to tolerate this. We need to, again, build back a better province for all workers. And this will be the most comprehensive system in the country. And I'm confident this will really, improve the lives of 130,000 people.
All right. Minister McNaughton, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, David.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.